A gentle breeze rustled through the golden fields as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the worn wooden fence. 8-year-old Emily pressed her tiny hands against the rails, her wide, curious eyes locked on the motionless figure in the pasture. The horse lay still, its dark coat glistening in the fading light, its deep brown eyes staring back at her. There was something haunting yet mesmerizing about the way it watched her, almost as if it were trying to say something. Emily had always loved animals, especially horses, but she had never seen one like this before. The townspeople whispered about him, a once magnificent stallion named Midnight who had suffered a terrible accident. His legs, once powerful and strong, could no longer carry him. Some said he would never rise again. Others believed it was only a matter of time before he was taken away for good. But Emily saw something different. She didn't see a broken horse, she saw a soul waiting to be understood. Every day after school, she would return to the fence, speaking softly to Midnight, her voice filled with kindness and hope. She would tell him about her day, about the stories she read, about the dreams she had of one day riding a horse just like him. Midnight never moved, but his gaze never wavered. It was as if he was listening. Her parents, watching from the farmhouse window, couldn't help but feel uneasy. They had warned her not to get too close. Midnight was unpredictable, and his future was uncertain. But Emily didn't seem to care. Something unspoken passed between her and the horse, something neither words nor logic could explain. Then, one evening, something changed. Emily stood by the fence as usual, whispering to Midnight, when a sudden chill ran down her spine. The air felt heavier, charged with something she couldn't quite describe. Midnight's ears twitched, his nostrils flared. For the first time in days, a spark flickered in his tired eyes. And then, to her astonishment, he shifted, just slightly, but enough for her to notice. Emily gasped, excitement bubbling inside her. She ran home, bursting through the door to tell her parents. But before she could get the words out, she noticed their expressions. Worried, cautious, unsure whether to believe what she had seen. Her mother gently reminded her that sometimes hope makes us see things that aren't really there. But Emily knew what she saw. Midnight had moved, he had responded to her. And deep down, she felt something incredible was about to happen. A few days later, her parents discovered something that left them speechless. Something that would not only change their perception of Midnight, but would reveal a stunning secret they never could have imagined. That night, Emily could hardly sleep. Midnight's movement, small as it was, had ignited something in her, a feeling she couldn't shake. She tossed and turned, wondering if he would move again, if he was getting better, or if she had just imagined it. But deep in her heart, she knew the truth. Midnight was trying to tell her something. The next morning, she rushed outside before breakfast, her feet barely touching the ground as she ran toward the fence. Midnight was still there, lying in the same spot, but something was different. His ears were perked slightly, his breathing steadier. When Emily called his name softly, his tail twitched. It wasn't much, but it was enough to fill her with hope. Her parents watched from the porch, exchanging worried glances. They had spoken the night before, debating whether they should tell Emily the truth, that Midnight was likely never going to recover, that he was too injured to live the life of a normal horse. But something about the way their daughter looked at him, the way she refused to give up, made them hesitate. As days passed, Emily kept visiting Midnight, and each time the connection between them grew stronger. She started bringing him small treats, sliced apples, carrots, anything she could sneak from the kitchen. At first he barely responded, but soon she noticed tiny changes. His nostrils would flare at the scent of the apples. His ears would flick forward when he heard her voice. And then, one day, as she reached out her small hand to him, his muzzle twitched, just enough to brush against her fingers. Her heart pounded. It was the first real sign of life she had seen from him. She ran back to the house, breathless with excitement, but her parents still weren't convinced. "He's been through too much, sweetheart," her father said gently. "Sometimes even the strongest animals don't recover." But Emily refused to believe it. That night, as she lay in bed, she overheard her parents talking in hushed voices. "I don't understand it," her mother whispered. "He was completely unresponsive a week ago, and now he's showing signs of improvement." Her father sighed. "It doesn't make sense, not unless something else is going on." Emily pressed her ear against the door, her ear. Emily's pulse raced as the SUV crept down the gravel road, its headlights bouncing off the trees. She crouched lower beside Midnight, her small fingers gripping his mane as if she could protect him from whatever was coming. Midnight let out a deep, uneasy breath, his ears twitching as the vehicle slowed near the edge of their property. The farmhouse porch light flicked on. Her father stepped outside, his silhouette stiff, his posture tense. Emily could just barely make out the hushed voices as the car door opened and someone stepped out. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, his voice low but firm. "You have something that belongs to me." Emily's stomach dropped. Her father didn't respond right away. Instead, he crossed his arms, his stance unwavering. "You're trespassing," her father said, his voice even. "It's late. You need to leave." The man didn't move. From where she hid, Emily could just make out his expression, cold, unreadable. But then his gaze shifted past her father, toward the pasture, toward Midnight. "I know he's here," the man said. "You can't hide him forever." A chill ran down Emily's spine. Whoever this man was, he wasn't here to help. He wanted Midnight for something else, something her father clearly wanted to prevent. A sudden movement startled her. Midnight tried to lift his front legs, struggling harder than she had ever seen. It was as if he understood the danger, as if he knew he had to move, had to run. But his legs still wouldn't cooperate. The man took a step closer. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he warned. "That horse—" He stopped himself, his jaw tightening. "He's not yours to keep." Emily held her breath. Midnight wasn't just a lost or abandoned horse. He had been taken, hidden. But why? What made him so important? Her father took a step forward, his voice lower now, urgent. "He's not going anywhere, not with you." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the man's face. He hesitated, glancing toward the pasture again. Then, without another word, he turned back to the SUV. The headlights flooded the field as he climbed into the driver's seat and pulled away, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Emily exhaled a shaky breath, but she knew this wasn't over. Whoever that man was, he wasn't giving up. He would be back, and next time she might not have time to hide Midnight. Emily couldn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word the stranger had said. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." What did he mean? Midnight wasn't just any horse, he was special. But why? Before the sun even rose, Emily slipped out of bed and ran to the pasture. Midnight was awake, his dark eyes watching her as she approached. She knelt beside him, pressing a hand against his warm coat. "We need to figure out the truth," she whispered. Her father's voice startled her. "Emily!" She turned to see both her parents standing at the fence. They looked exhausted, worried. Her mother held a folder in her hands, gripping it tightly as if she wasn't sure she wanted to let it go. "We have to tell you something," her father said. Emily stood slowly, her heart pounding. Her mother hesitated, then handed her the folder. Emily opened it with shaky hands, her eyes scanning the papers inside. Documents, medical records, even old photographs of Midnight. But one paper made her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't just a registration form, it was proof of ownership. Midnight wasn't abandoned, he had been stolen. He belonged to someone powerful, her father explained, someone who didn't deserve him. That man tonight, he wasn't here to help Midnight. He was here to take him back to a life of cruelty. Emily's hands tightened around the papers. Then we can't let them have him. As if hearing her determination, Midnight stirred beside her. He let out a deep breath, then suddenly, against all odds, he pushed himself up. His muscles trembled, his legs shook, but then he was standing. Emily gasped, tears filling her eyes. Midnight had done what no one thought was possible. He had fought back. But the moment was short-lived. In the distance, the sound of tires crunching against gravel returned. The SUV, they were back. Emily's father turned to her, urgency in his voice. "Emily, take Midnight, go!" Without thinking, she grabbed his mane and led him toward the trees, her heart hammering in her chest. Midnight followed, weak but determined. They disappeared into the darkness just as headlights flooded the pasture. And for the first time, Emily knew. Midnight had never been helpless. He had just been waiting for the right moment to fight for his freedom. Emily's heart pounded as she led Midnight deeper into the trees, branches brushing against her arms, the cool night air rushing past them. Midnight moved slowly but steadily, his strength returning with every step. Behind them, the sound of the SUV's engine idled near the house. She could hear voices, her father's firm and unyielding, and the stranger's demanding. She didn't know where they were going, only that they had to keep moving. Midnight trusted her, following her lead, his breath warm against her shoulder. She whispered to him, urging him forward, her fingers tightening around his mane. Then, after what felt like forever, the voices faded. The night became still again, the only sound the rustling leaves and Midnight's steady breathing. They had made it far enough. For now, they were safe. A few minutes later, Emily's father found them, carrying a flashlight. He knelt beside her, relief washing over his face. "They're gone," he said softly. "For now." Emily let out a shaky breath, her fingers still tangled in Midnight's mane. "But they'll come back." Her father nodded. "Maybe, but we won't be here when they do." The next morning, the family packed up what they could. They had made a decision. Midnight couldn't stay in one place, not as long as those men were looking for him. Emily didn't want to leave, but she understood. Midnight had fought too hard for his freedom. Now it was up to them to protect it. As they loaded the trailer, Emily whispered to Midnight, "We'll find somewhere safe. I promise." Midnight nudged her gently, as if he understood. Hours later, as they drove away from the only home Emily had ever known, she looked back one last time. The pastures, the fences, the memories, they were leaving it all behind. But as she turned to Midnight, standing tall and strong in the trailer, she realized something. Home wasn't a place. It was a feeling. And as long as Midnight was with her, she knew they were exactly where they were meant to be.